Mark, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and hearing about your journey. I know we've chatted briefly uh, offline, and I didn't really get a full flavor of the story, so I'm looking forward to getting all of it today. But before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're based, what it is that you do, and what's brought you here.
That is a very long journey. But let me tell you, firstly and foremost, my name is Mark Weisman, and I am a self-proclaimed shaman, of course, only because I don't fit into any other category. My belief system stem from my ancestors, the ancient Norse, and certainly the Celts of Europe. That's really where my beliefs kind of stem from. However, in college, in life, I discovered the connection between a spirituality, our spiritual beliefs and our spiritual understandings, and the general psychology
Mhm.
and of modern humans. And I began to make that connection. And of course, during college, I became ordained as a minister in the Christian church.
Mhm.
That led me on a discovery of working primarily with my brothers and sisters returning from combat, experiencing a level of symptoms, uh, traumatic events that occurred to them in conflict. And as we worked through them, I discovered, of course, more about me and more about my spiritual understandings. And it was during that time that I became connected, if you will, with
Yeah.
my my ancestors. My ancestors, of course, being of the Norse descent. That led me on a further explanation or a further exploration of my journey and my understandings. And one of the things that came to me once I left the Christian church in a quest to discover what my true spiritual beliefs were was
Mhm.
a freedom to understand not only one view, but all the views.
Mhm.
And it became a much bigger, much less burdensome way of living and way of understanding our lives and the journey that we all make. And that exploration and that understanding has led me to where I am here today. Today, I offer many individuals, I would say, an ear.
Mhm.
I rent my ear
Yeah.
for times so that they can begin to see outside of their programming of
Mhm.
what really is affecting them, and then work at it not from a superficial I got to meet a societal need kind of way, but from a foundation of
Yeah.
who I am, why I am, and what changes me. From that perspective, then and only then can we have a true relief within the mind, eliminating anxiety, eliminating depression, eliminating all of those things that modern day life unfortunately has a tendency to do to us.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all that. And one of the things that jumps out, because you talked about being a self-proclaimed shaman, but what does that mean? Like, what is a shaman in your view? Because we tend to hear that more now, and one of the things we tend to hear about, at least in the Amazon forest, shamans are providing guidance and insight on some plant-based medicine. But to me, the way I view it is shaman is someone who has just that insight, right? And who can guide you. But what are your like
Well,
what makes
well,
you a self-proclaimed shaman? Yeah.
really, a shaman is all of those things, but more importantly, shaman and shamanism in general
Hmm.
is when an individual is called by spirits.
Hmm.
They're not called by meeting some criteria. There's no bar, there's no measurement, there's no test that you can take or class that you can attend that's going to make you a shaman. Shamans are called by the spirits to do what they do. Shamans are conduits. We typically take what we're given from the spiritual realm and we pass it along to those on the physical realm. And then in many cases, because many people don't understand the breadth and certainly the understandings that exist in the spiritual realm, many times shamans are a necessity to help explain and to explore how to take this knowledge that you've now been given and apply it to your life. And so that's really, as I've looked at my life and what's transposed there, that's really that's the me in a nutshell, is that I was not a spiritual person at all, as luck would, I don't know if luck is involved, but as life would have it, I had ventured down when I was a younger man. I had ventured down a very dark path that wound up in a drug overdose in 1989. It left me really completely lost because I had no idea at that point. And then literally 7 months, almost to the day later, I met and married my shield maiden, whom we've now been married almost 34 years now. It wasn't one of those lightning strikes that says, oh, you're now
Yeah.
called kind of thing. It's certainly not how it happened for me. It was a constant transitional for many years as I determined what the voices were, what I was communicating, what I was feeling. And all of these things drove me to recognize myself as a conduit for the spiritual entities. And
Yeah.
people started referring to me in this way once I left the Christian church. And I just, okay, that works for me.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And to me, how I interpret that is you have this deeper intuition. You're able to draw a lot of wisdom. Now, a lot of the times people don't really understand that. So when you say calling, like, what does that mean? Right? Like, what does that mean for someone who's trying to understand what what are you hearing? What are the
What,
messages you're getting? Right?
and that's a tough one to explain because
Yeah.
a lot of it comes down to what am I feeling? And from what am I feeling, what do those feelings, what do they do to me? What physiological pieces come into play when I feel this way? And when you begin to, certainly during meditation and time of intrinsic reflection, you're going to get overwhelmed, I think,
Yeah.
to some point of feeling as if not that you're missing something, but that there's something to gain, that there's something to learn. And there's this constant quest to, oh, okay, how can I learn this? What can I learn here? What can I know? What parts am I missing? And it's that drive that I think is commonly referred to as a call. Is just there's a real desire to learn about something, whatever that is.
Yeah.
For those people who come to any sort of spiritual guidance and say, oh, I have the answers and here are the answers, they're purely kidding themselves. We are all just travelers together. I can
Yeah.
tell you simply what's worked in my 58 years of living. And the honesty that I can bring you is to say, not all of my 58 years has been this glowy, white robed lifestyle that everyone's going to envy. No, quite the contrary. My first 25 years or so, 20 some years, were a nightmare. They were honestly the other end of the spectrum that I want to be on. But it was those experiences then that allows me to understand where I am today. And it allows me to help other people who are still back at that other place and say, hey guys, this is what it took for me to move forward. And so that's the word that I spread, is that there is hope. There's always hope. Hope is an eternal flame that burns within us. We can surrender it, but we can't kill it. So it's just a matter of rekindling that fire if that's what's necessary and getting back after it.
Yeah, for sure. And hope is something I've really reflected on over the last few weeks, especially. So it's almost synchronistic that you bring it up, but it's been powerful because there is that, again, with hope, it requires it kind of, it's along the lines of faith, right? It requires this suspension where it's you're relying on this surrendering, right? And accepting that, okay, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to surrender to whatever's coming up and lean into it. And that's something you're touching on. So what shifted for you? Because you mentioned that you're telling people this is what it took for me. Was it that overdose that you alluded to earlier? What was that turning point in your life that allowed you to shift and then start leaning into the work you're doing now and changing course?
I wish I could. I wish I could point a finger.
Yeah.
I wish I could say, "Oh, it was that moment," or "It was this
Mhm.
other moment." But I think it's been a culmination
Mhm.
of so many micro steps that
Yeah.
they weren't even perceptible at the time that they were happening. But
Mhm.
now you look back, that you get that hindsight and you're able to review and you go, "Holy monkeys, look what I've
Mhm.
done and look how I've accomplished and look what I've learned and what I now know." But I don't think there was, for me, I started ministry. Ugh, I hate that word, but um, I started working with people um, when I was ordained in 2001.
Mhm.
And I started as a chaplain
Mhm.
for the Christian church. And even at that time, when I had become ordained and I had done all the studies and I had accomplished some bar set by somebody I had no idea
Mhm.
and became a minister, I and I preached peace and love and harmony and those things, those general terms.
Yeah.
Even then, there were missing parts in
Mhm.
my heart. There was just parts that, and obviously, as I would find out later, parts that Christianity could never fill
Mm.
because it wasn't until I left the church, and it was about, that was 2008, 2009, when, and I left the church and began to really study all practices. I was studying the laws of Islam. I was studying Judaism, Confucianism. I studied many different
Mhm.
understandings until I started feeling that I needed to know my ancestors.
Mm.
Now, this is out of the blue. And I was like, I don't understand, but okay, I'll do some amateur genealogy here and start figuring out what. Come to find out, my ancestry went pretty far back.
Yeah.
Go on to develop ultimately 53 generations, 54 generations to
Wow.
find my great grandfather, whom began a process when I would meditate I would go into a trance. I would meditate very deeply. I would think about my ancestors and I would focus on them. I would try to picture what they looked like, what they would say, what they would think of me. And I was constantly thinking about this when one night, and I want to say it was like in 2011, 2012, sometime in there, where I woke up from my meditation, I got out of meditation and realized that there had been a page written on a
Hmm.
piece of paper in front of me. And the piece of paper was written in such a way that it struck me insanely stupid momentarily,
Mm.
because not only was it written in runes, which at that point I had no idea what runes were other than just a Germanic alphabet. I had no idea the power of the runes, but just as importantly, it was written in Danish,
Mm.
a very old style of Danish. And it took me, I would say, probably a month to translate the document from Danish to English, or from runes to Danish, then Danish to English, until I got the message. And the message was that we're all listening. What are you saying?
Mhm.
And that's when I really began in earnest to use more trances, to do more meditation, more concentrated meditation, began to have more of these events where I was receiving information and literally handwritten notes by my hand that I don't remember writing, that told me that here were some ideas, here were some thoughts and some knowledge and intellect. And I began to accumulate them. And now, as of as of today, I think I have 4 books, just handwritten notes that I have received during these trances that now I can work with, that gives
Mhm.
me some context to understand life and
Yeah,
certainly this universe.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I do agree with you when you say it's not one moment that you can pinpoint, because when I look at back at my journey, it's almost like I could watch this movie playing back, right? Where it was like these, to your point, these micro movements just stacking one on top of the other and then creating this experience to where I was like, oh, okay, I understand now. And
Exactly right. And
yeah.
so many people discount those small imperceptible steps, but
Mhm.
they're required to be at where you're going to be. It's all part and parcel. It's part of the trip. It's part of the journey. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and you're exactly right. You look back and you go, "Yes, of course."
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing some of the experiences you've had as well. Now, one of the things I do want to ask you is, because, even in terms of receiving a lot of these insights as you've shared, when someone from the outside isn't able to understand, they'll dismiss it as, okay, this guy's losing his mind, he's crazy. And I can appreciate when you're on that spiritual path, you don't really care what people are saying, right? Because you've found this deeper sense of connection and acceptance within yourself. But still, as a human, or as a spiritual being going through the human experience, how do you kind of look at that when people dismiss it, and what level of compassion then do you
I think I have all the compassion in the world,
have?
and it's only I always alert people to our journey downstairs for a midnight snack.
Yeah.
And life is like that. Life is dark. Life is unknown. Of course, when we speak of dark energy and we speak of the darkness in all of existence, we're speaking of the unilluminated or uneducated or unknowing yet. And it is only by us being there with a flashlight and able to navigate through until we can find a light switch, right? And we can actually get to at least to the refrigerator door, because we know when we open the refrigerator, of course, it's going to have a light on it. My point is much like that in life, and this is what I always tell people, is that
Mm-hmm.
you need to be willing to pick up your flashlight.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, pull up a pillow and blanket because it's nighttime.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not until you begin to see around you that you have one of two real paths, and this is the struggle that everyone meets, is that you are either A, going to become more devout in what you do believe, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that is, whether you subscribe to monotheism, polytheism, whatever, right? You're going to understand why you believe that,
Mm-hmm.
and things are going to click. Or you're going to begin to question it. Either way, you're going to grow from it. And that it was the best part of my life, is as I educate people, as I illuminate them, hopefully they begin their journey of one of those two paths. They're
Yeah.
either going to become more devout, they're going to study, they're going to break it down and into the micro steps so that they understand exactly, and there's no arguments in their mind.
Right.
Because we always have to remember that spirituality is all about our perspective. We can all stand around and look at the same mountain, but we're
Mm-hmm.
going to see it differently. We're going to
Yes.
see it differently because we're standing at different places, we're looking at different angles, we're going to see it differently. Spirituality is that mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And our spiritual beliefs is the person next to you who's looking at the same mountain. Are they wrong? No, of course not.
No.
They're seeing the mountain from their angle,
Yep.
from their perspective. And of course, you can drill it down into the emotional filters and the chemistry and all of that and get into this really philosophical discussion as to seeing the mountain differently. But realistically, just by being standing next to me, your angle is a micro difference.
Mm-hmm.
You're different and you're not wrong. You're not any more right. We're the
Mm-hmm.
same. We're looking at the same thing. So when we think about our spiritual beliefs, whether you believe there's one God or you're changing your perspective and say, oh, there's multiple deities, whether you change it again and say, I'm not really into the deities thing, but I get the spirits,
Yep.
it matters not. We're all looking at the same thing from a different angle. No one's wrong. No one's right. Spirituality is big enough for all these different perspectives, and yet there's still more. There's still room.
Right.
We still got room for other perspectives, and on and so forth for infinity. I think that's probably the biggest message I would say that I give to people, is that who are critical of beliefs that are outside the norm,
Yeah.
is that it's a different perspective. If you're buying a car, you don't stare at the door and expect the whole car to be perfect, do you? No, of course not. You walk around the car, you check the tire, you check the engine, right? You're going to look through the interior and you're going to make sure it's got features and same thing should apply for the things in your life that are important. And spirituality is a cornerstone to who you are. So
Mm-hmm.
you would think you'd want to check it out completely
Yeah.
uh, before buying.
Yeah.
So that's the analogy I like using. One of my favorite that I got in a very early trance that really shocked me into my current understanding of it was breaking the whole idea of spirituality down into a puddle,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to look at the puddle. And of course, because of my Norse ancestry, there was 9 people around the puddle. And as they all looked at the puddle, they saw the reflection of the sky above them in the puddle.
Mm-hmm.
They could all see it a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
They would see different cloud formations. They may see a bird fly through. They're going to see different. And as we move around the puddle, we're gaining more of a perspective of the entirety of the puddle. But our true gift, our true desire, hope, is that we can turn to the person on our left or on our right and say, what do you see in the puddle? And gain their perspective. Now you're drawing in their experiences that can augment or help you with your own.
Mhm.
And so it allows us to grow as a spiritual being.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I totally appreciate that and get it. And I think one of the things I've come to appreciate also and realize is often we're so attached to our perspectives, or majority of the times we're insecure about them, that when we feel challenged, we tend to get upset and uh, for me, when I'm confident about something, it's easier for me to be okay to accept other people's views and also open myself up to being challenged because I'm like, okay, maybe I can learn something new. It's only when I'm really attached and insecure about my own views that I get threatened and get upset at other people. And that's significant too, right? To realize it.
Right,
And then you can have that compassion again for
right.
individuals.
And that's really where you can break it down into something that you do, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of people get uncomfortable when speaking about their spiritual beliefs. And so when we take it out of that context and we put it into the context of a new car, you know, you're buying a new car on the lot. The new car is spirituality. And what are you going to do when you're buying that new car? You're going to check it out, right? You're going to
Mhm.
look at all the data, you're going to check the mileage, you're going to do all of the hopefully you're going to do all your homework before
Yeah.
you make a major investment in a car. The same thing applies. And so I find that and that's one of the gifts that my ancestors have given me, is being able to take it out of the spiritual, take it out of that uncomfortable conversation and bring it into a what would you do in your home when you had this situation? Okay, let's walk through that. And you can step them through that and it applies. And then you say to them, okay, you just evaluated your spirituality. Great job.
Yeah.
And of course, then it dawns on them that, oh yeah, you're right. You're
Yeah.
exactly right. You don't have to subscribe to what I believe. Matter of fact, I prefer you don't. I
Mhm.
prefer that you believe what you believe, but just
Yeah.
believe it and don't do it because grandma, grandpa, whoever said so. Believe it
Mhm.
because it makes sense in your heart and your mind, and it feels right. Those are the keys, and if you can gain comfort from your spirituality, you're in the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things with respect to attachment is labeling things. And I know when you and I chatted about labeling of deities. So why is that something that you take interest in? And what's your view on all of that?
Labels, I think, if I could point out a single fact that has caused more division throughout
Mhm.
the generations that have studied, particularly monotheism, but it's nowhere, doesn't have a corner on the market by any stretch,
Right.
is this idea of labels. And what labels mean is labels is a human thing, and we need it to reference something. Is that we can't say that thing over there. No, that would be horrible. We have to say that fence over there, the brown fence. So we have to get into all this description. And those are labels that we're applying to convey a message. The problem is so many people get hung up on the brown fence, they forget that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about dividing yards, not the brown fence. And so then we get the arguments. No, it's not brown, it's really dark red. And we get into all the and we spend more time arguing about the color of the fence than we do for the purpose of the fence
Mhm.
or the reason around it. And so the problem with labels is they're many times they're applied incorrectly and out of context. right? So we'll use a phrase, my favorite one, my favorite bad one. I don't
Yeah.
know if that flies here. My
Well,
favorite is the word heathen.
mm,
I've been referred to a heathen on a multitude of occasions, of which I promptly correct people. I am not a heathen. A heathen is a gardener. I'm
mm,
not a heathen.
yeah.
You don't want to see me in a garden. Bad things happen. I don't take care very well of the creator's creations with these thumbs. Heathen is a phrase that was originally intended to, it comes from the same thing that your hearth comes from.
Hmm.
They're all gardeners, right? But the church grabbed a hold of it and began to mean people who were not like us.
Hmm.
So heathens and barbarians were close,
Hmm.
according to the civilized world of the Roman
Yeah.
Empire and beyond. And but everybody hung on to that, and it began to be applied outside of the context at which it was originally intended.
Hmm.
And now people use it just off the cuff, and they don't even know what it means.
Hmm.
The other one that pushes my buttons, I only have two buttons. The other one that pushes my buttons is pagan. Another
Mm,
pagan means villager.
yeah.
Has nothing to do with anything other than your cultural beliefs.
Hmm.
Why are we applying it to our spiritual beliefs?
Hmm.
I don't know. So again, as long as labels that are problematic only because we then begin to argue about the
Right.
word, we put too much value on the word and
Hmm.
forget about everything around it.
Hmm. Well, and I think one of the things I've reflected on quite a bit is the whole metaphysical aspect of putting ourselves in a box and limiting our own understanding and potential when it comes to everything. And that's kind of what you see with labels as well, is this limitation when we put ourselves in a box and we try to define everything within that box. So I definitely see that happening as well. Now, I do want to shift the conversation a little bit and understand your experience as far as you mentioned being in the church and some of the work you were doing there, because there's an aspect of with the church, at least what I've come to understand through personal experience too, is it becomes political. And there's a purpose that the church serves. In my case, in my faith system, it's the mosque, and it's a purpose that it serves. But what affected me personally was the political side of it, and then people obviously succumbing to the need for power or greed, and that takes away from that spiritual sense. Yeah, so my question, I wanted to ask you a question around your experience with the church and shifting away from it a little bit as well, because in my experience what I've come to realize, and what in my faith system is this Islam, so mosques for me at least, that often the political stuff gets in the way, and there's greed and the need for power, and that whole idea, and what the church and mosque or synagogue or temple, what they're trying to serve is that community aspect, that spiritual connection. But that goes away when you get people involved. And I see a lot of people that have religious trauma too, where they associate the faith system with the people that are in charge. And that to me becomes a problem for a lot of people because they're not able to differentiate between those things. So
That's correct.
what was it like for you being a part of the church system and then shifting away from it and then kind of doing the work you're doing now?
Well, I think one of the biggest things was the definition. Firstly, let me define what I discovered
Hmm.
as a definition, if you will, of religion.
Hmm.
And religion has a sliver of spirituality, followed, connected with a large section
Hmm.
of practice. If in religious teachings, practice, and the practice, of course, includes words like thou shalt, thou will, do this, do that, do this other thing. The spiritual side simply says, here's the information. Here is the love. Here is the forgiveness. Here is the path. There's no thou shalt do anything. So whenever you slide into, and certainly most religious practices have this section of group of people who are more interested in the practice than they are in the spiritual side, supposedly leaving the spiritual side to the leadership of the church, right? The downside with that is that the individual partakers of the knowledge are not going anywhere. They're not growing, they're not learning, they're not loving, they're just following blindly, if you will. And so as I ventured through the church, there were so many issues I had with the doctrine. Because the problem with most religion is that the doctrine doesn't match the ideology. Okay, so there's a separation right there. And the problem with that is that there's only so far you can go by asking the questions, right? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? You can only go so far, and then they're going to go, right? The downside is to that theory and that line of thinking is that, unfortunately, that's where many people just stop. And they say, oh, okay, there's no answer to that. So we'll call that faith. That's not faith. That's the easy way out, right? We have to learn. We have to grow. We have to go beyond what the spiritual leaders are telling us. We have to go beyond that. We have to have our own relationship with the spiritual realm and how that's going to work in our lives every day. And we have to have that conversation. And so I know I struggled, like I say, I struggled very deeply with many parts of the doctrine, particularly as it separated further and further from the ideology or the, not even the perceived, but the original. If you go back to the original documents, you can get the gist of their ideology. But by the time it was written into the holy texts, it had already been manipulated, and the doctrine had already pulled away from the ideology. And so you're technically you're just preaching someone else's behavior modification that has no bearing on your spiritual growth, on your spiritual path. The other thing, and I just want to clarify something you said a little earlier, and I just want to clarify, a lot of people think that the spiritual journeys that we go on are this other path of life that we say, oh, we're done being human, we're going to go be spiritual. And the two are not mutually exclusive. You can't have a spiritual journey unless you have a physical life. They're part and parcel. You get them both. And you never stop being either. So if you go and you become a mountaintop guru with all the answers from the spiritual realm, this beacon of knowledge and wisdom, you're still human. You still have to go to the bathroom. You still have to sleep. You still have to eat. Yes, you may alter your diet quite a bit, and that's great. But nonetheless, there are some basic requirements. You have to breathe. You're still human. And most importantly, you are still going to feel. You still have feelings regardless how spiritual you are. Matter of fact, the more spiritual you are, typically the more emotional journeys that you have. I think a lot of people get confused and they think, oh, this week I'm going to go become a shaman and I got to go on this spiritual journey and I'm going to leave everything behind. And no, you're not.
Hmm.
You have however many years of living stuffed up here. It's not going
Right.
anywhere. You're not going to forget it. You're going on to a better, different path.
Right.
And so they're not mutually exclusive. And I always try to make sure people understand that because, yes, being spiritual means taking the garbage out.
Yes. Yeah.
It means washing the dishes. It means everyday life.
Hmm.
They're not, and I think people tend, and this really feeds into the monotheistic practices that I've studied anyway, where many people are Sunday morning quarterbacks,
Yeah.
right? They go and they show up and they do the routine and they do the whatevers. They may show up for a function during the week, but for the most part, they're there on every Sunday.
Mm.
And it's, yeah, get the touch on the forehead and I can leave kind of thing. When in fact, your spiritual life is going on all the
Yep.
time, 24/7, 365 from the day you draw air to the day you stop.
Yep.
It is always there. And I think a lot of people get confused about
Mm.
that. And that sometimes, because they say, much like I said, when I overdosed on heroin, that's the most nasty of all drugs,
Mm.
I think, in my experience. And I was like, how can I be redeemed for this?
Hmm.
How can I ever hope to find redemption?
Hmm.
There is no redemption.
Hmm.
There is, I learned a lesson that I'm never going to do that again.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to allow other people to do it again.
Hmm.
Or in the first place, I'm going to do everything I can to stop people from doing
Yeah.
that. And is that redemption? Or is that just me saying, hey, I learned that lesson, move on,
Yeah.
you know? And so one of the things that I had somebody asked me one time is like, well, what qualifies you to be a shaman? How can you be a shaman? And I'm like, you could be a shaman.
Right.
Who knows? The, we don't know who the spiritual entities are going to call upon. I was not looking for this.
Right.
I I was not in the market for a spiritual connection at all.
Hmm.
Yet the spirits found me and they began to communicate with me. And now I've loved every second of it.
Hmm. Yeah. There's something I do want to touch on. You mentioned, and it's important because I find a lot of people, to your point, because they want to go on this spiritual path, they want to run away from the worldly things, and it's that thing that we've talked about, you and I've talked about too, how to be in this world without being of it. And life is a struggle. The human aspect is a struggle. It's not something you can run away from. You can't just avoid the distractions the material world offers. And in my faith, that's the biggest thing I've taken from it is we're in this world for the struggle. And there's the beautiful thing I've understood about my faith is we typically have a call for prayer, and typically after that call for prayer, you pray it soon after. But when we're born, we have that call for prayer whispered into our ear, and when we die, there's a prayer for us. So that from the day you're born till the day you die is a full circle, and
Right,
that is the struggle. That's your
right,
whole spiritual journey. And
right.
that, when I think about, that's just so powerful because to your point, it is a 24/7, 365 days a year struggle. And we can't just
Yep.
go once a week and say that I've checked this box and I'm done now. Yeah.
And that's exactly right. But when we begin, and I think that's part of the enlightenment that
Mhm.
happens as we go through our journeys and we go through our paths, when we begin to understand that, yes, it is all the time.
Mhm.
You're never away from your spiritual gifts. You're never away from your spiritual ancestors. You're always connected. I believe it gives us amount of freedom,
Mhm.
the freedom of the mind, in that no longer are we having to meet these societal
Mhm.
bars. I know in my life, one of the things that really happened once I left the church and I found my way back to the Norse Celtic
Mhm.
understandings and beliefs is I felt relieved,
Mhm.
a huge sense of relief that I didn't have to meet bars. I didn't have to come up to some standard. I didn't have to do things a certain way and wear certain clothes and meet with certain people. I could just be me.
Mhm.
And that was enough. I didn't need to be anyone else.
Mhm.
I get asked all the time, and people see me and I'm out riding on my Harley, and they'll be like, "You don't act like a shaman." You're right. I'm not acting.
Yeah.
I'm not an
Yeah.
actor. I'm just me.
Right.
It but it really gave me that freedom that said, "Wait a minute. Why am I jumping through all these crazy
Right.
hoops and doing all these crazy things when I can just be me?
Yep.
I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to pretend to be something or be happy when I'm not. I can just
Mhm.
be me."
Right.
And that really gave me I think, of all the gifts I got, intellect and all things aside, the biggest gift I think was that freedom of the mind
Mhm.
that allowed me to just
Right.
relax, just unwind, get rid of that stuff. Now I still stress about, am I gonna have enough gas to make it to the gas station because I forgot to fill up my truck? And then once I make it to the gas station and I put gas in the truck, that goes
Yeah.
away. I don't have to worry about, I'm gonna get out of the truck here and there's people watching. I have to act a certain way because I'm a this or that or this other thing.
Yeah.
No, it's just you begin to live your life, I think, more congruently
Mhm.
and more authentically.
Absolutely.
And that really gives just a massive freedom in the mind.
Mm. And I think we talked about the labels, and that's the idea when people are like, "Oh, you're not acting this way." What does that mean? I'm just being. That's it.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Just be, right?
Yeah.
There's the
There's no adjective
yeah.
here. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And one of the things I do wanna finish off with is just understanding you've made reference to your ancestral background and the Celtic kind of background there. How have you then been able to understand some of that ancestral trauma as well? And is that something you've had to work through as well from a generational perspective? And how's that been part of your journey? And what have you come to understand from all of that?
Great question. I don't know that I'm the obviously, there's generational
Yeah.
trauma that happens, and I can either absorb that or not.
Mhm.
In my life, I have chosen I'm not there fighting.
Yeah.
I'm not there doing the
Yeah.
tasks. I'm not going to accept responsibility or blame or credit or anything else that I didn't earn.
Mhm.
If I screw something up, by all means, I'll take that
Yeah.
hit. I don't think, as I've dealt now with many ancestors of mine and others, I don't know that's one of the things that's passed.
Mhm.
I've done a lot of reading, particularly about my family and my history and their lives and their accomplishments, and sometimes they're not so accomplishments. And I've read it, and I think I absorbed the understanding of what they were trying to do. And but it leaves out the fact that there were people traumatized.
Mhm.
Uh, By all means, that I can sugarcoat it 3 ways to Sunday, but my ancestors were Danes, and Danes were not the happiest people on the North Sea. They were not known to be the outside of their own tribe. They were not known to be the greatest people ever. But that didn't make them wrong. And that doesn't make them bad. It made them, we have to put it in context for their time. And what worked back then doesn't work now. Obviously, I can't go Viking today. I can't even imagine the stack of laws that would be involved in that. But that was appropriate for their time. And so I think we have to always, whenever we speak of trauma and how generations are going to pass that down, we have to remember the context of the framework that we humans have built called time. And we have to put things in their appropriate time
Right.
and say, that was not wrong in that time. By our standards, looking back at it today, oh, yeah, that's bad. Yeah, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
But in that time, in that place,
Yeah.
that was what worked.
Right.
And that's what they did. And so I don't think that there's a trauma to be associated there.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't think that goes for anybody, because you can find generational trauma in any belief, any belief. Pick one. The monotheistic practices all have them. Polytheistic practices have them, particularly the large society, Mesopotamia, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Romans. Pick a culture, and there were parts that were a little sketchy, but ultimately, in their time, that's what
Yeah.
worked.
And I think we have
And
we can just have that snapshot in time to look back on, and we have the benefit or the luxury of hindsight. So it's easy to question some of those things when looking at it from our view. But like you said earlier, we're just looking at the mountain from a different angle. So that's brings us back full circle. But Mark, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it and learned so much from you. Is there anything else you would like to add that we didn't touch on? I know we covered a lot of ground, but yeah, I just want to give you an opportunity if there's anything you would like to add beyond what we talked about.
the greatest thing that everyone can pass on is there is hope. At the very core of all of existence, there is hope. And for those who are struggling and need to speak or need to see a little more, I'm going to pitch, if I may. I'd like to pitch my show, which is a 30-minute show that's available for streaming. It's on etherealtv.net. You can stream them. There's a whole bunch of episodes up there right now. You sign up for a little subscription fee. I don't remember what the subscription fee is, but you sign up, and there's tons of shows on Ethereal about many different topics, many different perspectives. This goes back to what we were talking about before about perspectives and just having so many views, which is wonderful, which is why I'm so pleased to be a part of Ethereal. So the show Whispers of the Norse is available on Ethereal. You can download it at will. Just become a subscriber, and me and 9,500 other shows, you can download what you need. In addition, every weekday morning at 6:55, give or take, Alaska time, I do a morning affirmation. Just get the spiritual juices rolling. That show is available on YouTube. You can join me, like I say, every weekday morning, 6:55 Alaska time. And we just cover some basic ideas and some hope for a better day today than yesterday. And we're always just trying to make that one step better. And so you can always go to our webpage, which is the center of our universe, and that's NorseWhispers.com. Norse, of course, being as in the Viking guys, Norse, Whispers as in a whisper, and .com. NorseWhispers.com is the center of our universe. So you can find all the things about our media. You can ask questions. You can find out some history about the Uthatnar. And certainly my journey is all there. You can visit that site. So shameless plugs there that I'll gladly put in. The biggest thing I hope to convey is learn to listen with our hearts and learn to listen through hope.
Yep.
Because when we do those two things, we realize that humanity is all in this together, and all we can do is help each other or hurt each other, and it's just better to help.
Yes, absolutely. No, and I appreciate you sharing those plugs. I would have asked you anyways, so no worries at all.
Okay.
We'll definitely put that in the
Okay.
show note captions. But thank you so much, Mark, for your time today. It was a great conversation. Appreciate.
Thank you so much, and thank you for following up with this. I realized that we moved this out a day, so I'm glad we were able to connect and get the word out.
Yes,
Because again, that's the important part, is getting the word out.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, my friend.